Welcome to Queer Spirituality, the podcast. I'm your host, Julian Crosson-Hill. This podcast is about an idea. It's the radical idea that queerness is a gift and that the divine celebrates it rather than merely accepts it. We'll explore the special role that queer people are meant to play in the coming spiritual awakening. Through the lives and stories of queer people, we'll explore the many ways of approaching the divine and how the sacred reveals itself in everyday actions. Most of all, this is a podcast about love. It's about the love of the universe, it's about love between people, and it's about the love a community can share with one another. Thank you for joining me. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Queer Spirituality Podcast. I'm your host, Julian Crosson-Hill, and with me today is a very special guest. Storm Faerywolf is a professional author, experienced teacher, visionary poet, and practicing warlock. He was trained in various streams of witchcraft, most notably the fairy tradition, where he holds the black wand of a master. He is a chancellor of Modern Witch University, a co-founder of Black Rose, an online course in modern folkloric witchcraft, a columnist for The Wild Hunt, and is the host of the Witch Power Daily podcast. He has written several books, including The Stars Within the Earth, Betwixt and Between, The Witch's Name, and The Satyr's Kiss. For more, you can visit his website at faerywolf.com. Hi, and welcome to the show, Storm.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've known each other a while, and so I'm really looking forward to digging into this conversation. You've done, as your bio outlined, a lot of things and been in a lot of traditions. One question I always like to sort of start with my guests with is, what does queer spirituality mean to you?
For me, it's certainly changed over the years. But the one constant for me is the recognition that we need to center ourselves and our queer experiences in our spirituality. I think that so many people see our sexuality and our spirituality as something that is separate or even at odds with one another. And I think that a healthy queer spirituality reconciles that. It brings it together and honors our sexuality. It honors our desire, the pleasures of the body, as being something that is a core spiritual belief.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I've always sort of said the same as well, that queer spirituality needs to be sex positive because being queer is inherently sexual. And we need to have that ability to incorporate our sexuality into our spirituality. So I love that definition. You use the word warlock, and I know that you're probably getting tired of explaining it because it comes up a lot in interviews with you. But for people who are new to you or your work, just high level, short, give us the short version. Why warlock and not witch, like so many other people are doing today?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I'm not tired about talking about it. I've reconciled to the fact that I'm going to need to keep talking about it because it does kind of go against the grain of societal witchcraft, we'll say, which is a kind of a funny thing in itself. But for me, I use warlock first and foremost because it is the dictionary definition. It is a male witch. If you look at the dictionary, that's what it is. A lot of pagans will take exception to that because they've bought into a story, and it is a story, that somehow this is a negative. It's an insult, within the witchcraft community. And they base that on the original definition of the word, an earlier etymon, which says that the word meant an oath breaker, a deceiver, right? A liar. This was someone who broke a covenant. But we can also look at that and realize, well, it was a Christian era word. It didn't really exist before the Christian era. So whose covenants are you breaking? So it's specifically about going against the Christian societal grain, and it was used primarily for men, and so it has that masculine, quote unquote vibe, to it. How the reason that I use that, and I also use witch, I will use them interchangeably. I do acknowledge that witch can be a gender neutral term. However, it's still, the word witch still carries a decidedly feminine kind of backstory, and that's fine. However, for somebody like me, I grew up as a gay boy in the 70s and 80s, and kind of claiming my right to be male was a big life battle of mine. I was always told that, oh, well, I would never be a real man, because the real man was a heterosexual, also white, but so you you have to fit into this very narrow parameter, in order to be able to be masculine. And so part of my life work in this is to redefine what masculinity is. I identify as a man. I'm a gay man, cisgendered gay man, and that's been something I've had to fight for, because again, I was told, well, that's not real masculinity, and I'm here to say, well, no, masculinity is what we make of it. I'm just embodying masculinity in a different way. And so I'm trying to say, hey, there's more choices here. But when I call myself a warlock, I do get something akin to a sort of gender euphoria, because it is affirming my gender, right? Something that I was told that I couldn't have. So for somebody like me, it can be a really powerful word in order to claim our masculinity and kind of to center the divine masculine in our work as well. And I mean, we can have a whole conversation of what is the divine masculine. I think that's a very nebulous thing, and it's worth talking about. We're not going to come to any sort of answers that everyone's going to agree on, but that's basically my story. Also, I grew up on episodes of Bewitched, so they were all the men were warlocks. So there you go.
Yeah, I love that. I grew up on Bewitched as well, and I gravitate towards Warlock as well for the same reason. That's funny. I think it's really interesting what you said there about redefining masculinity a little bit, because I grew up in that era as well, where if you didn't fit a certain macho stereotype, you were a sissy or you weren't really a man. And I think that we still see, even in our queer communities, we see this sort of stereotype or very narrow mold of what masculinity has to be. Right. More feminine presenting gay men really struggle, and we see a lot of backlash against femininity in our male expression.
Absolutely. And that's something that we all need to be very aware of. On the surface, we might think, oh, the gay community, would be so accepting. And I feel like we should be. And I'm always extra offended when I see that we're not, as a group. I kind of feel like any minority, anybody who's been oppressed should know better. And yet in our minority community, we see that there's still a lot of shadow work to be done, and that really does manifest as even casual misogyny. I mean, that is kind of the big thing in the quote unquote masculine world anyway, right? Masculinity is a trait that is fragile. It is easily revoked. If you step outside this very narrow definition, then, oh, suddenly, they're going to call you a fag, you're queer, you're a fairy. I heard all those things, growing up, and I embrace them all. They're terms of power for me, because I have done that work, around them. That's a lot of shadow work. There's a lot of internalized homophobia that I think needs to be addressed. But it does manifest often as misogyny, because that's like the biggest insult, right? In the masculine world, the biggest insult you could hurl at someone else is to accuse them of being feminine, as if femininity is something deplorable, right? But in the toxic masculinity world, it is, right? And so that's the biggest thing. You see that casually in our culture. You watch any like movie in which there's a sports team and there's a locker room. The coach comes in and addresses all the guys there. Hey, ladies, whatever. And it's meant to put everybody kind of down. It's meant to, keep everybody, in this weird kind of very rigid hierarchy. So for me to use the word warlock, I'm not trying to get away from the feminine, but I am trying to raise up, the masculine to kind of rise up and greet divinity, in its own way. So it's about working through toxic masculinity,
Yeah.
addressing that, but also having fun with it. I think my feeling about warlock also is that, um, obviously it was used as an insult. Like so many of the terms that we in the queer community rally around now, they were used as insults against us. But once we take the power away from it and we start using it ourselves as a positive, then it really can't be that much of an insult anymore. It can't take your power away anymore. And so that's another reason that I choose warlock.
Yeah. Yeah. Very powerful. And definitely we still have a lot of internalized homophobia and misogyny to work on in our community. So you've been in a lot of different traditions of witchcraft and done a lot of things, and you're teaching a lot. What is it that first drew you as a gay boy, or whenever it was that you started your path? What drew you to witchcraft specifically?
I honestly think the thing that first drew me was just, the allure of power. I'm not going to lie. This idea that like, oh, you could kind of subvert, the established rules, by it's almost like a reality hack, right? I mean, that's kind of how we kind of see magic in any way. It's like, oh, using this lesser known set of rules in order to kind of bypass society's rules, right? And
Yeah.
so as a little queer boy, before I even knew I was queer, I did feel out of place. I felt othered and I didn't know why, but then here's these reruns of Bewitched. And that's really the theme also of, I mean, they're using witchcraft as kind of the comedic theme, but it is really a story of an outsider trying to blend in. It's actually a very queer coded story.
Oh
Not
yeah.
not even taking in consideration how many actual queer people worked on that show, and like basically almost all of the men that appeared on that show were queer. Almost, not all of them, but almost all of them.
Yeah.
And and I think that I kind of subconsciously identified with that without recognizing why, you know. But I just was always drawn to magic and fairy tales. If there was a witch, there was something about the witch. I loved the witches. I mean, like, I loved all magic, but the witches especially. That just really drew me. Later, I would get more of a psychological appreciation for things like ritual and working on the shadow, self empowerment. But those were not the initial things, I will admit, that drew me. I mean, I could say that and try to sound all cool, but no, it was power. I was, because I probably felt a little powerless, a little rudderless at the time. But I was very young. I was 2 years old when I told my mother I was going to be a witch. And again, not to do with self empowerment, more to do with Samantha Stevens. But hey, got to start somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah. And Bewitched was just incredibly queer. There were even a lot of queer women on that show. Agnes
Yeah,
Moorehead, I believe one of the actresses that played Tabitha later came out. And of course, everyone loves Uncle Arthur. So,
absolutely, absolutely.
so, so yeah, wonderful. Yeah, I find it interesting that gay men in particular that I've talked to who are in witchcraft, it's usually that sort of otherness of the witch and their own otherness as a queer person that sort of draws them towards that as a spiritual path. So, um, in talking about this definition of queer spirituality and really making our queerness part of our spirituality, not something that's sort of separate, and also our sexuality, um, let's talk a little bit about the Satyr's Kiss, because this book is about gay sex magic, and to my knowledge, it's one of the first, if not the first, published book that really delves into this idea of queer sex magic. So, what was that like to even like get that book out to the public?
Let's see. I'm not 100% sure it's the first book that deals with queer sex magic. Um, I remember there was a book. I'm not going to say what it is because I didn't like it, but there was a book that I read. It might actually be in the bibliography, but there was a book I read that was on that subject, but it didn't really tell you anything. It was
Right.
like it purported to be about this, and yet it was more of a memoir, and it didn't really give me anything practical, and I ended up, I
Sure.
was recommended to me, and then I was like, oh, this is actually terrible. So again, I don't want to say what it is because I'm not in the habit of putting other people's work down. If I like your stuff, I'll promote it. If I don't like it, I just won't talk about it. um but in terms of like what the Satyr's Kiss is, it's the first of its kind anyway. I think that, and please, if somebody else out there wrote something else, let me know. I mean, there's other things that kind of intersect it, but not
Sure.
quite what I presented in the Satyr's Kiss, which is a healthy dose of sex magic, for solo practitioners, for couples, and even groups. And that was something in particular that I really wanted to put in there. I wanted to help kind of normalize plural relationships. I'm in a plural relationship. There's four of us now. We're a tetrad, and that still rubs a lot of people the wrong way.
Mhm.
And even people that were accepting when my husband Chaz and I, when we got Devin and we became a triad, that kind of was an upset for a lot of people. They didn't really understand what was going on. But then, Devin's been with us 13 years. And, so that's a good chunk of time for people to accept it. And then we got Matt, a couple years ago. And then people once again were like, what the heck's going on? So I feel like polyamory is definitely something that I want to keep talking about. And so I had this perfect opportunity to kind of put those values in this book as well. Not to say that this is what people should be doing. I'm not
Sure.
going to tell people what their relationship models should be. But I am going to say this is what we're doing, and this is what's working for us right now, and it's worked for us this amount of time, and whatever. And maybe that can help somebody else to see, hey, it's not all about this. It has to be one-on-one. I also don't want to like give the impression that I'm getting down on monogamous
Sure.
relationships, if because I think that's just as valid, but a plural relationship is just as valid as a monogamous
Right.
one. It's all about the individual boundaries, what everyone's needs are, a lot of communication, trying to do things ethically, but I don't think we need to follow this particular model for everyone. So I definitely wanted that to be in the Satyr's Kiss. But outside of the sexual stuff, I also wanted to put a good dose of queer history, recognizing that I'm not an academic, I'm not a historian, but I put in a lot of different queer figures from history who were not connected to the craft in any way, but I claim them as what I call the rainbow dead, because I think it's so important that we recognize the contributions that queer people have made and that we feel a sense of connection to them. They might not be from our particular culture or our race or religion or any of that stuff, but they are part of the overall queer culture that has been emerging for honestly thousands of years. And we find ourselves in this very, um, um, I don't know, we find ourselves in this place in which we can see our history and we see how things have changed. But here we are now, and we need to really honor what has come before. So again, kind of that old adage about the ancestors: if we stand tall, it's because we're standing on their shoulders. I also wanted us to remember the older queers. A
Yeah.
lot of the rights that we take for granted today, they literally fought and died for. And I think it's vitally important that we remember their contribution, because also it could go that way again.
Yeah.
Just because we have certain rights today doesn't mean we're going to have them tomorrow. I mean, here in the United States, they're actively working to take them away,
Right.
and call me an alarmist, but I can see which way the wind is blowing. This
Yeah.
is not cool. And I think that we have to be very aware of that. We have to keep talking. And that means sharing ourselves, the fullness of ourselves, especially when it's uncomfortable. I don't necessarily
Yeah.
like talking about my personal relationship, with the world, but to a degree, I feel like I have to, because if I'm able to share, a little bit about that, maybe that's going to help somebody else kind of sort through their own stuff, their own shadow stuff with it. So that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things there that I think are really, you know, I've been I've been in poly relationships myself in the past. My husband and I are now monogamous. Um, Known lots of people like yourself who are polyamorous, and it was always funny to me during the gay marriage debate that one of the big things that was the slippery slope was, well, then there might be group marriage, and it's like, oh, what if, It just was such a like silly thing for people to be so afraid of. So
Right.
what if there was group marriage? What if that did happen? Like, who's that harming?
Yeah, I'm
It
hoping
always
that
felt really
happens.
absurd. Yeah,
I totally hope that happens. It always felt absurd to me that we can't have that, because what is marriage but a contract?
right.
And and so I kind of feel like, well, if we're all legal adults, we should be able to enter into whatever contract we want to, and if we're not allowed to, then that's not exactly freedom, you know.
No, it's not. And it's really that in our country, we've conflated certain religious ideas and perspectives with the legal framework of this contract that actually creates the marriage. We've taken
Absolutely.
the spiritual ritual and conflated it with the legal construct. And for some reason, we've been unable to separate that, even with gay marriage coming along and being legalized. I really like that you're teaching history in the book and that you're talking about our history, because that's something that I feel very passionately about, that it's very important. And Michael and I, Michael Lloyd, who was my co-facilitator and co-founder of Between the Worlds, for years we referred to a lot of the Rainbow Dead as our queer ancestors, our spirit ancestors. A lot of gay men don't have children, so we don't have descendants in the same way that heterosexual couples do. And so really thinking about those people that came before us as our queer ancestors, I think, is a very powerful way to think about them. But also just, we lost nearly an entire generation of queer men
Right.
to the AIDS epidemic. And there's really a gap in that knowledge of our own history. And with the current attacks on the queer community, it's really important that we know what has come before, so that we don't accidentally find ourselves back there, so that we know to get fired up about it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. When I was a kid, probably early teens, I mean, this is kind of the height of the AIDS crisis at the time. And, we all owe a great debt to the group ACT UP, who
yes,
really made it visible and wasn't going to shut up. I mean, that's where I got the slogan, right? Silence equals death.
right,
And it was because our government hadn't even mentioned, thousands and thousands of queer men are dying, and others, dying of this disease at the time, and they're not even mentioning it. And part of that is, of course, because a lot of people thought, well, it was killing the right people.
right.
And and I think that we have to recognize that there's a good chunk of society that would rather see us dead. And I don't want to dwell on the negative, but I don't think anything is served by pretending it's not there, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
And it is there. And the only way that we can combat that is to continue to tell our stories, to continue to stand up for what we think is right, to call things out when we see injustice in the world. We have to speak truth to power. We have to, shine a light, on that. And that's the only way things change. It's only through confrontation. And,
yeah.
not everybody is in a position to be able to do that. And that's fine. If you're not safe doing that, then you don't do that. But, I consider myself in a safe place. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area, and that's a pretty safe, place. I work from home, whatever. So
Yeah,
that makes it a little
right,
safer too. Hello. Um,
right.
so that's what I do. I speak out because I know a lot of other people can't. And
Yeah,
so I feel that it's my responsibility to do, because I can, but not everybody can. And so if you
sure.
can't, then you shouldn't feel bad about not. Just, I think the most important thing is to live your life, unapologetically. I think that's the biggest political statement any of us can really make, is to simply live our lives authentically.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm in Ohio, which isn't exactly the safest state, but I am in a big city and I do work from home as well and have a platform that I can safely speak up. But there are people in some of the small towns in Ohio that certainly cannot, and probably
Right.
shouldn't until they
Exactly.
feel ready to move away. So
Yeah, I mean, those are real concerns,
yeah,
right? I mean,
yeah,
for we can be targeted for the smallest little thing, or even just, something that's perceived. It might not even be true.
yeah,
I know some straight male friends of mine who have been perceived as being queer, and so have received violence,
yes,
because of that. So it's not just, happening to queer people. It's happening to people just based on somebody's perception. And it's because they were taught that that was okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, it all comes back to this toxic masculinity you were talking about. Someone who isn't in that toxic masculinity, who's perhaps absolutely straight, but maybe they present a little more feminine, or they have a little too much empathy or a little too much style, and they're perceived as something else and othered and then targeted in that way. And it all just kind of comes back to that same issue of the toxic masculine culture that we have in our society today. One of the things I really wanted to sort of ask you about, that I'm curious on your thoughts about, is writing a book on gay sex magic. We have in our queer community a little bit of a hookup culture, and a little bit of a somewhat unbalanced obsession with sex, and with judging other people based on whether you want to shag them or not, right? Like, you don't really see people being friends with older men because there's automatically that assumption that the older person wants something in return, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've given workshops in the past on gay sex magic, and they sometimes attracted a certain type of person that really wasn't there for the spirituality, if you know what I mean. And yes. I'm curious, like, how much have you experienced that?
Well, with the book, I haven't experienced that much of it, honestly, because I think, if they read the book, then they know where I'm coming from, and when, and in person, or in my regular teachings, I do teach sex magic, but it's certainly not like the scandal that people want it to be, it's actually, depending on your point of view, you might look at that and be like, that's really boring. Like, because no one's taking off their clothes, whatever. I'm giving an actual assignment, go and do it and report back, and, whatever. Yeah. I've taught in-person group classes in sex magic. And, the first thing I will say is, like, no one's going to take off their clothes. We're not actually going to have sex with each other. But it is about kind of almost redefining, well, what do you mean by sex, right? And so, I'm not taking that Bill Clinton-esque definition, whatever. I'm like, come on. Sex is sex. It doesn't matter what way you did it. Sex is sex. And you don't even really have to take your clothes off, right? Sex is really a blending. It's much more about energy than it is about bodies touching, And so I've often said that, well, you can have an intense sexual experience by watching a beautiful sunset, or listening to an opera, or having a fabulous meal, paired with the perfect wine or whatever. And it's because this new energy comes in, and it's this sensual explosion, and it opens up our energy body. We become energetically permeable. And to me, that's really the core of what's happening in sex. And, but a lot of people really wanted to focus on salacious details. But those people quickly reveal themselves to not be, right, for the particular group, or, for that. We did used to have many, many years ago, when I had the shop, we had a group that was open to the public for a while. That was a queer men's pagan group, Brotherhood of the Satyr. It since became private because we realized, oh no, we were getting a weird element, showing up. Even years after it went private, I remember somebody actually called the shop, and they were looking for that group. And in the phone conversation that I had with this gentleman, and I'm using the term loosely, he revealed to me the measurements of his rather large endowment, and how he was looking forward to coming to this group so he could share that with everyone. And I thought, this is just not anything like what we even advertised, back in the day. Right. We never took our clothes off. It wasn't, it was open to the public. We weren't about to do anything like that. Even when we went private, it was a group of friends. We never did actually sex magic with each other. We never even did skyclad ritual, not because we're prudish, but that wasn't part of our agenda, But so many people think, oh, queer men, therefore it must have sex, right? So I definitely in the book wanted to have sex in there, because I do think it's important to have spaces in which that's available, where that's allowed. Even looking at hookup culture, I don't think all of that is bad. I've certainly participated in hookup culture. It's when it becomes the norm, and then you're unable to form, actual lasting relationships with people. That's the
Yes.
problem, right?
Yeah.
It's not the
It's the
hookups themselves.
objectification. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. It's no longer seeing this human being as a human being. It's just an
Right.
opportunity for you to have sexual release. And if that's the case, I think you're doing everybody a favor if you just jerk off.
Yeah.
Whatever. But also some people are into that. They want to be objectified. And so here's a good opportunity for people to meet each other and be able to do those things. But again, that's kind of like eating candy.
Yeah.
You I don't think you shouldn't just only eat candy. You're going to get sick.
Yeah.
Your needs aren't going to be met, so yeah. But in the book, I definitely want there to be a sexual element because it's so easy to go the other way. It's so easy to look at like something like hookup
Yes.
culture and be like, oh, that's bad. And therefore sex is bad. And I'm going to be pious now. Oh, I'm spiritual. I'm not sexual. I'm spiritual, as if these are opposite ends, the
Yes.
spectrum, and they embody each other. Sex is spiritual, you know, even like hot, kinky sex is spiritual,
Sure.
but it's not so spiritual that it's only spiritual. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The people go the other direction and they're just like, oh, it can only be in this overtly spiritual way to elevate me, to ascend, or, whatever. And, sometimes sex can just be hot and you can just get off, and that can be a spiritual thing too. It is pleasure. Pleasure is good for you, so
Absolutely.
I want to find this mid ground. Yes, it's spiritual, but it's not transcending the body.
Right.
The body is not something to abandon, to transcend, or to think of as lower vibrations. We get into that spiritual vibration through the body. It's about
Well,
recognizing they both
right.
operate in the same space. It's not binary, it's quantum.
Yeah. I mean, we're in physical form for a reason, and denying the whole experience of our physicality is really losing a whole big piece of the puzzle of like, why are we here? And it's because
Absolutely.
we came here to experience these things. I really like that you focus on the middle, because I think that's really what the core problem is sometimes in the community that leads to this, like, no femmes, no blacks, no fats,
Yeah.
all of this, and into that objectification, is that it's the extremes. It's the people who are either so pious and so like prudish that you can't mention sexuality at all. It's all got to be, lofty and spiritual. Or you got the people it gets into this like hardcore objectification where you aren't even willing to talk to another person if you're not physically attracted to them, which is really missing out on a big piece. And when I came out in the 80s during the AIDS epidemic, the queer community was a little tighter knit, and there definitely was a lot less of that. um it was still there, and we still had sex for sex sake, but it was definitely less so. And I think in some ways it's almost like if you give a child free access to candy, they're going to eat too much. And it's almost like the internet and apps and things have sort of done that. It's made it so accessible that there's kind of too much of it going on. Um, One of the things that I talked to another guest, a previous guest, about that I think was really interesting, and you're similar age as us, the role that gay bars for so long played in creating community, and now that has sort of moved away, and everything is sort of revolves around the internet or apps. How do
Mm-hmm.
you feel that has impacted our ability to form strong communities? And what can we do to form strong communities in absence of some of those meeting places?
Yeah, I think it has adversely affected our community at large because it used to be that we would actually gather in person,
Right.
right? And we could interact with people, and you do get a greater sense of bonding, when you are, with people and you see them like, oh, I'm seeing them at the club every week, or whatever. That was my experience, growing up. Um, but now with app culture, it takes it away from community and places the emphasis on individuals. And it certainly has its place. I'm not saying get rid of apps,
Right.
but I do think that we need to look at that and recognize what's not being served, by the apps. And again, that is a physical location that people can actually show up to, and meet other people and have an opportunity to talk to other people, maybe people that you don't want to have sex with. What a concept, right? Actually, can have a conversation with somebody. Yeah, so I'd like to see more of an emphasis focused on building queer spaces that are not virtual. I'm not saying
Yeah.
get rid of the virtual spaces at all. We absolutely need them. We probably need more of them. But we also really need those physical spaces. I want to just, kind of honor, you and Michael Lloyd for a moment, because, you were putting together the Between the Worlds festival. I attended for several years in a row. As you know, I was keynote speaker one year. And that was such a profound experience to be able to have, to go to this place out in the woods. And here's a bunch of other queer men, queer, spiritual pagan men. And we can share our magic, and maybe we can share our love, and, whatever it is, share some meals. And it was a beautiful, beautiful experience, and not one that I knew that I needed until I actually had it. I
Sure.
remember that first year, by the next day, I felt like, oh, all of my shields are down. I didn't even know that I went through life with all of these shields up, just as a default. But then being in that very queer centered space, they just were able to fall away, and I was able to more fully relax. And it was such a profound experience for me. I will say it was life changing, to be able to be in a situation like that, and much different than like the bar culture, as well. With the bar culture, first of all, usually it's at night, and it centers around things that can be problematic, not just the sex thing, but also alcohol and drug use. I will say I'm a fan of alcohol and drug use. I'm not a fan of abusing those things. There is a difference. But for a lot of people, they are especially problematic. And so maybe we need more queer coffee shops. Maybe we need more queer bookstores, things that aren't centered around, the use of substances, or clandestine encounters. Again, you have apps if you want to do that. But I think we need to focus on more spaces, for queer people to be able to gather physically. I'd like to see more of that happen. More queer festivals, please. Hint, hint.
Yeah, definitely. Not really doing queer festivals anymore. I don't camp, but retreats are definitely something that.
Oh yeah, we were talking a little bit about that before we started recording, and I'm with you. I'm 52, and I don't want to camp anymore unless camping means I have a cabin with heat and an actual bed. So I'm at that level now. But that's kind of what we're focusing on. I have some stuff in the works, not necessarily for a specific queer audience, but for a witch audience. We're thinking about that, and I'm like, but I can't camp. It has to be a hotel. It has to be like cabins at least. So
I'm totally with
Give
you.
Me a shower, I'll be fine.
And when I read BTW, it's amazing how many people were interested but wouldn't come because they weren't comfortable camping. So there's definitely an opportunity to reach even more people with something that isn't camping. So
yeah, totally. I mean, I get it. I camped for a while and I loved it, but that was many years ago. And I'm just like, now I totally get it. When people say, "Oh, I'm too old for this," I'm like, "Oh, I feel you, girl. I'm too old. I'm too old to sleep on an air mattress and then wake up on the ground the next day anyway." I mean, that was always how things would happen for me. Like, oh my God, really? Just give me a bed. Just give me a shower and a bed and an actual toilet, and I'll be fine. Anything other than that, no thanks.
I totally with you on that. Totally with you. What else would you want to share with the audience that we haven't gotten to? Is there anything sort of really burning in your heart that you just really want to get out to queer people?
I mean, I think we've touched on really my main message, which is I really want queer people to be able to center our own queer lives in our spiritual practice and not feel like our queer lives are something like secondary or something that's outside our spiritual practice. So many people in the witchcraft movement, so many queer people I know, are operating within traditions that are really heteronormative. And I'm not here to get down on traditions, for their heteronormativity or their queerness or, whatever, wherever they fall, on that spectrum. But I think for queer people, we need to recognize that maybe this heteronormative mystery isn't our mystery. And maybe that's okay, and we don't have to say, oh, it's awful and no one should do it. Well, no, what is it? 90+% of people,
Right.
are probably heterosexual. And, I think that works great for them. I think straight people, if they're working in like a Gardnerian or Gardnerian-esque, paradigm, that's going to affirm most people. However,
Yeah.
that's not me. That doesn't affirm me. And that doesn't mean that I'm bad. It just means that maybe I need something else that's going to speak to me. And so that was another big motivator for the Satyr's Kiss, was I wanted to kind of touch on these things, kind of bringing it up, saying, hey, I'm doing this. And if you want to join me, you can do this too, or some version thereof. I don't want people to do exactly what I'm doing, because I'm not
Sure.
trying to like tell people what to do or build an army or any of that kind of stuff. But I want to inspire people. I'm hoping that
Yeah.
I can inspire people to make their own rituals and to center their own queer experiences. One of the simple things that I wrote about in the book in terms of a ritual structure, if you're already casting a circle or whatnot, and I was saying one thing that we could do is maybe orient ourselves, or maybe orient the altar to the direction of the stone wall inn.
Right.
Where are we in relation to the stone wall inn? And because that can help us remember our history, but give us a place in our physical space-time location where we have a relationship to this thing. It's not just this amorphous thing that happened in the past. It happened in a physical location that is real, and
Yeah.
we can affirm that by simply just even facing that direction in a ritual sense. Now, of course, it doesn't have to be Stonewall. It could be anything else. There were so many other moments in queer
Sure.
history that we might want to do that with, But so, what inspires you? What does it inspire in you? If I say, take your queer lives, our queer history, our queer experiences, and make that the center of our spiritual path, what does that mean for you? Because
Yeah.
I guarantee you it's going to look different for me than it does for you. And that's what's so beautiful in my mind about a queer craft, is that it is going to be changeable and different, and that's okay. In fact, that's an affirmation of its validity.
Right, right. People get hung up on this idea of tradition, and like the other witch traditions have somehow been around forever, even though they've all come out of people doing exactly that, taking something and making it their own, and making it something that spoke to them, and creating a
Exactly.
tradition around that. And we can do the same thing as queer people with what we want to resonate with in our rights. So I think that's a really powerful point to be sharing with people. I believe you mentioned that you had a special offer for people who were listening today. Did you want to share that?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So you'd mentioned our school, our course in witchcraft, Black Rose. So I am here to offer a free month. It's a 13, I'm going to put it in air quotes, 13-month course. Lessons unlock every week. The upfront price, if you pay for the whole thing, is $250, or you could do it by the month, which is $25 a month. But if you use the special code Magister, that's Magister, then you can get your first month free. So you can kind of dip your toe into the water. But if you go to modernwitchuniversity.com, you'll see all of the classes that we're currently offering. We're about to unveil some more soon, so stay tuned. But if you click on, classes, you find Black Rose in there, then you can just use that discount code, and then you can kind of see if this is going to be something for you. It's a pretty good group of people. We have a private Discord server, so there's a lot of activity, going on over there. We have various weekly chats that happen. There are some different events that will happen for members of Black Rose. You also get special discounts on certain other things, from our store, .trading.com, as well as discounted sessions with me. If you want to have a session, a one-on-one live session with me, you can get that at a discounted rate. But yeah, I'm encouraging everyone to check that out. You can go to blackrosewitchcraft.com and it should take you right there. Just sign up for a free account and then use that code Magister to get your first month free. And we've been doing Black Rose since 2015, and it's actually grown way beyond what we thought. It was, we've had close to 1,400 people, sign up for this class. Currently, our Discord server has close to 300 people actively, on it. So it's a good group of people, and I feel very blessed because everybody is just there because they want to learn about the craft and share their magic with each other, and it's been a really wonderful thing. And so that takes up most of my time. I'm the chancellor of the university, so I'm the one who's answering all the emails and figuring out account problems and that kind of stuff. But it's been really rewarding just to hear from people, what they've been able to get out of the course, and hopefully very soon, I got my fingers crossed, a Black Rose 2 level is going to be coming out. We're actively working on that. So again, stay tuned. There's that and some other classes we hope to unveil pretty soon on the website.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, kind of a weird synchronicity because we were in the process of trying to schedule this interview, and I had purchased an out-of-print book through Amazon, and when it came, there was a Black Rose postcard stuck in the middle of it. So
really,
yeah. So I thought that was
cool.
Pretty funny. Yeah. So neat little piece of synchronicity there. So how do people get a hold of you or find out more about your work?
You could always go to my website. That's faerywolf.com. That's FAERY wolf.com. There's no fear in fairy. For some reason, people want to misspell it. So there you go.
That's a great slogan for it. Yeah.
Should get a t-shirt made. But yeah, or you can go to modernwitchuniversity.com, go to modernwitch.com. I have a podcast. There's 30 episodes for season 1. That's and you can find that at witchpowerdaily.com. And that's a way for people to get a sense of how I offer my teaching. I do a lot of trance work with people. So Witch Power Daily there's 30 different episodes, so 30 different exercises where I'm leading you through either a guided exercise, trance journey, a spell, or a ritual. And hopefully in the next couple months, I'll start working on season 2. We'll see. But yeah, you could go to any of those websites, but it's all linked to my website at faerywolf.com. So you could find anything that I do there. My services, you could book private sessions with me. I sell art.
Someone's at the front door.
Trying to make it all work. So
great. Yeah, wonderful. And we'll include all the links in the description for the podcast for the people that want to see those. So
thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you for joining me, Storm, and for sharing some of your insights. It's been really interesting, and I think that we've covered a lot of ground in 40 minutes or so. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for not only inviting me on, but for having this space available. I think it's so necessary that we make these kind of, sojourns into queer consciousness and to share that with each other. So thank you for doing the work that you do.
Thank you for that. Find my blog and past episodes of this podcast at www.queerspirituality.net. That's www.queerspirituality.net. Let me know what you think on Instagram at queer_spirituality, or continue the discussion with like-minded people in the Queer Spirituality Facebook group. You can find it linked from the Queer Spirituality Facebook page or on the homepage of the Queer Spirituality website. Bright blessings.